From its initial creation in 7th century BC, the country of South Korea has evolved physically and culturally to become one of the wealthiest countries in all of Asia. Today, South Korea contains Asia's most advanced democracy. Along with incredible technological advancements, universal health care, and freedom of religion, South Korea boasts one of Asia's highest standards of living. Additionally, Korea's pop culture has spread out beyond the country, known as the Korean Wave or Hallyu. But although Korea's global influence is clearly visible in the present, the nation was not built in one day. Less than a century ago, Korea was a country plagued with struggle and conflict. Following the Russo-Japanese War and then Japan's annexation of Korea, the Korean people took a stand through the March 1st movement in order to protest the violation of their rights and for the independence of their country. Although the March 1st movement is perceived as a failure by historians in achieving Korean liberation from Japan, it was a significant cause of the start of Korea's independence movement and unification of people who identified as Korean. Also, it serves as an example of peaceful resistance for other groups around the world. Prior to Japanese occupation, the Japanese-Korean relationship had been beneficial to both sides as they both profited off trade. And it was not until the Tongak Peasant Revolution that Japan's intentions of conquering seemed to be more realistic. The frightened government asked the Qing dynasty of China for help to quell the peasants' rebellions, and they responded by sending 2,700 soldiers to Korea. Angered that the Koreans allegedly violated the promise made during the Convention of Tientsin, Japan started the Sino-Japanese War. Ultimately, Japan defeated China before beginning dominance in Korea, causing anxiety for the rebels. Then, in 1895, tension was created between Japan and Korea as a group of Japanese men murdered Empress Myeongsong, the last empress of Korea and the first official wife of King Gojong, due to her resistance towards Japanese influence. This was complete insult to the Koreans, a quote, hideous event, crudely conceived and brutally executed, end quote. Through these series of events, the Korean people grew exhausted of the mistreatment and disregard they faced as a nation living under the oppression of Japan. It was the Russo-Japanese War that ultimately landed Korea under Japanese authority. After years of disputing who would take over control of Manchuria, Russia and Japan finally settled their friction with the signing of the Treaty of Portsmouth, otherwise known as the Ulsa Treaty of 1905. This formally ended the Russo-Japanese War, as Russia also gave Japan control of Korea and much of South Manchuria. The Japanese occupation and eventual annexation of Korea posed challenges to the national identity of the Korean people. Assimilation policies, such as the discarding of traditional Korean names, helped with, quote, making Japan and Korea into one body, end quote. Additionally, the mysterious death of the Korean king, Emperor Gojong, spurred rumors that he had been poisoned by the Japanese, pushing the Korean people past their tipping point, kick-starting the March 1st movement. At 2 p.m., March 1, 1919, the 33 core activists of the March 1st movement, or Samil movement, began their fight at Tapgal Park in downtown Seoul. Notable activists include Kim Gu, Sigmund Rhee, and Choi Nam-son, whom of which organized the March 1st movement and drafted the Korean Declaration of Independence. Quickly, massive crowds began to grow as readings of the declaration was heard throughout the park and neighboring towns. Taeyang Dongnip Manse, long live the Republic of Korea, became the cry for all. Peasants, farmers, students, pastors, men and women joined the protests. The bonds formed by patriotism spurred the Korean people to unify, to fight against the Japanese for independence. Although this was a peaceful protest of shouts for independence and a declaration reading by the Koreans, they were treated with grave hostility by the Japanese officials. Unsystematic slashings and shootings spread throughout the nation as forms of suppression. In one well-attested incident, villagers were herded into the local church, which was then set on fire. The official Japanese count of casualties included 553 killed, 1,409 injured, and 12,522 arrested. But the Korean estimates are much higher, over 7,500 killed, about 15,000 injured, and 45,000 arrested.
A lot of things that happen in defeat are actually powerful generators of huge reaction that makes things stronger.
Many became martyrs for their country, for their rights as Koreans. Specifically, Yu Gwan-sun, a 17-year-old Christian freedom fighter, helped to organize a peaceful protest against the Japanese occupation. Deeply influenced by her faith, Yu Gwan-sun was determined to free her country. Carrying the voices and leading the masses to freedom was one young, fearless soul that became the face of the independence movement. Many were not given a fair trial or any trial at all, and were tortured to death or executed without probable cause. Many of these tortures and executions took place at the infamous Seodaemun prison in Seoul. The prison was used by the Japanese to hold Korean independence activists. Originally, it was made to accommodate up to 500 people. However, quote, up to 3,500 prisoners were packed inside during the height of the anti-Japanese protests in 1919, end quote. This led to the rapid spread of contagious diseases and regular beatings, causing many prisoners to die in custody. Around 40,000 freedom fighters passed through the entrance gates, and at least 400 died or were killed inside, including Yu Gwan-sun, who was tortured to death in 1920.
내가 왜 죄인이냐? 내 나라 내 땅에서 만세를 부르는 것이 왜 죄냐? 무차별 총질을 해대어 내 아버지, 어머니를 비롯해 수많은 사람의 목숨을 저리도 무참히 빼앗을 수 있느냐? 죄가 있다면 불법으로 남의 나라를 점령한 너희에게 있다. 나는 죄인이 아니오. 우리나라가 독립하는 그 순간까지 죽는 한이 있어도 만세를 부를 것이오. 일제는 반드시 망할 것이고 너희 외놈들 천벌받을 것이야.
Unfortunately, the United States did not support Korea at this time. In January 1919, President Woodrow Wilson issued his 14 points, which stated, quote, a free, open-minded, and absolutely impartial adjustment of all colonial claims, end quote, regarding U.S. relations with Korea. However, the reality was that Wilson wasn't interested in challenging global power relations with Japan. Nevertheless, the most important outcome of the movement was a provisional government of the Republic of Korea on April 13, 1919 in Shanghai, China. Until 1910 to 1945, the government resisted the Japanese colonial rule, coordinating the armed resistance against the Japanese Imperial Army. In present day, the people of Korea still recognize it as the first government of the country. In the effort to achieve independence, the March First movement is considered a failure due to the direct consequence leading to more forceful authority and unjust treatment of the Koreans. However, outside the borders of Korea, the winds of change were blowing. Non-violent rebellions sprung up all over the world, inspiring upheavals such as Gandhi's Satyagraha against British imperialism, as well as the May 4th movement, a peaceful student uprising against the government of China. And even within Korea, the March First movement jump-started the locomotive that would become the Korean independence movement. From this one event, the Korean sense of nationalism grew to expansive proportions and ignited the nation.
Failure would be if the Koreans were completely crushed and they never spoke up again. But they did. They were so angry that they did speak up again.
In the June 10th movement in 1926, thousands of students participated in anti-Japanese protests. Then, in 1929, students remained silent or shouted for liberty in a refusal to sing the Japanese national anthem in the Gwangju student independence movement. So despite its initial shortcomings, the March First movement was more than just a short-term defeat, but in fact, a long-term success with a clear goal of autonomy. The Korean people took a stand to become unified once more.